Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Get Out of Rap. And I'm now joined, I can now say this properly, a friend, true friend of the podcast. This is now, is this third or fourth? It's
This
third.
is this is number three. Yeah, the magic
This is the
number.
hat trick
Number three.
appearance.
It
Yes,
is.
three is the
Yeah.
magic number, de la soul. So,
Yeah.
Stu Dorman from Sabio, thanks very much for coming on again. It's always your appearances have always generated a lot of feedback, a lot of interest, and as I think I've mentioned before, you talk so eloquently. I'm not setting you up here, but you talk so eloquently about our industry and the future. So, thanks very much for coming on.
Well, thanks for being on. I feel very humbled with that comment, and it's great to be on again. Outside of these, I love catching up with you. We've got a great relationship. We're doing some really cool stuff together at the moment, and it's great to be back on the podcast.
No, brilliant. And we're going to start with something that might be a little bit, but not contentious isn't the word, but just is definitely going to generate some thought. And that is where voice sits in our industry and some views around it from that have been talked about for years and where it might be heading in the future. Why is this the subject of choice?
Well, where do we start? I think for the probably last decade, as more and more money has gone into digital transformation, if you like, the web, mobile, trying to create graphical user interfaces for customers to use as their primary point of contact with organizations. I've been to conferences, and I've been to lots of places where people talk about killing voice and maybe killing the contact center and trying to drive everyone towards a graphical user interface, and arguably I think maybe putting up a barrier between the customer and the organization. And in some cases that's a good thing. That graphical UI as a barrier, as a point of contact, can be great. We can get things solved really quickly. But I feel there's been a bit of an over rotation towards that, to maybe to the detriment of the thought and consideration around what it means to have human contact. And obviously human contact is driven by voice. That's how for thousands of years we've used our voices to build relationships and to engage in commerce and to exchange complex ideas. And that remains to this day. And I think there's been a bit of a reawakening over the pandemic, where we've had customers that have maybe needed more reassurance. They're going through quite emotional issues themselves. They may be worried about their job, how they're going to pay their bills, all these kinds of highly emotive issues that mean people need that reassurance of human contact. And that human contact, again, because of the pandemic, has really accelerated towards the contact center, because for the last couple of years I haven't been able to go into a shop and speak to somebody. Everything's been done over the phone. So yeah, and like I said, I've actually been to conferences where people are walking around with T-shirts saying "kill voice," with
Really?
this perception, with this perception that everything's going to go digital and maybe via chat. And I think we're sort of realizing now that voice is and will remain, a really important part of how we communicate with each other. And we need to nurture that and invest in it, I think, because it's such a natural thing to do.
Do you think because the stats around the extent to which customer preference, right, customer choice, and the channels that we use in the industry, is it around? It's been pretty static. Voice is what, 70%? Am I right? Or
It's actually a bit more than that. I think the
really?
last, yeah, it's sort of 75+% of contact with organizations is still through voice. And you sort of email has been quite kind of static for a few years. It's declining a little bit. Messaging has been increasing, but from a very small base. So I think we are seeing more messaging. We do it in our personal lives, right? We message more with each other now, and that doesn't, it kind of augments voice. It doesn't necessarily get rid of voice. So, but voice still dominates, by a significant margin, and and I think, yeah, because it has declined. It's been declining a bit if you look at overall contact volume. But the interesting thing is if you look at time spent on the phones, time spent speaking to people, and if you look at the stats across the industry, average call durations in call centres have doubled it's just over 10, it's about 13, 14 years, but from what they were 13, 14 years ago to now, AHT's doubled. So what that shows, it's an obvious thing to state, but what that shows you is that, yes, digital interactions are taking away some of that contact, the simple contact, but what you're left with are those really complicated, quite emotive, emotional, personal type of issues that only we humans really can deal with. And there's all kinds of conversations that we could talk about there about how, the role of the increasingly important role of the contact centre, and how the role of the agent in the contact centre is becoming ever more skilled and competent. It's a very professional role now. And the tools that we need to provide agents need to be more sophisticated to help them do their jobs more effectively. So
What were the drivers, do you think, then, to go back to, because there was probably, you assume good intent, right? So what were the drivers, do you think, behind the kill voice, like, let's say, movement?
yeah, I think it's cost. It must be
Yeah.
just the call center. The call center is a cost center. It costs us money to deal with all these annoying customers. So let's try and get rid of it. Let's try and create these new digital spaces where customers can go to solve all of their problems, and build it, and they will come. Let's create these tools, and people won't need to pick up the phone anymore. And it's worked. It's worked to an extent, but as with anything, it's not never quite as binary as you think it will be. And what it has done, like I say, is meant that the calls that do end up in the call center are just much more complicated.
Don't you think it's quite reassuring in a way about kind of human behavior? Well, I was going to say customers, but it's kind of like human behavior, isn't it? It's, yeah, that's fine. I absolutely love technology, love what we're doing in our industry, but
Mm.
in a way, it's kind of reassuring that there's still, ultimately, we're there for our customers, and customers still need to be able to speak to someone.
It is. I think I'm a technologist. I love technology. That's what I do. I'm an engineer at heart. I
Mm.
still, it fascinates me how technology, improves society, and all the kinds of things that sit behind that, and all the implications of that. But also, I'm quite a sociable person. I love speaking to people. It's really made me think about how we are just wired to to communicate using our voices. Gesticulating. Obviously, I'm doing this now, but certainly using our voices. Um, Particularly, like I say, when it's an emotive issue, and God, we've had quite a lot of those in the last couple of years. So
Yeah.
yeah, no, I think it is reassuring, and it just goes to show you how important the human face of an organization is, and how, if you're going to build a relationship with a customer, you need people involved. I'm
So,
not sure you can build a relationship just through a screen.
there's this, apparently the study of language is one of the oldest sciences around, and a lot of it is centered in um, the reason it's so linked to connection is we innately, or very quickly, understand the patterns of our conversations.
Mm,
So and we love those kind of patterns, and it is a way of us establishing connections with each other, even if that is over the phone to a stranger about a service.
mm.
Wonder if, with that in mind, what you, when you look at the future, the part voice plays, do you see it remaining static in terms of the preference, the channel of preference, or do you see any changes there?
Um, we may. I think there's still a way to go, in terms of improving the sophistication, if you like, and the usability of digital tools. And I know in one of the last podcasts, we talked a bit about AI and conversational user interfaces as opposed to graphical user interfaces. And I still think we're in the early stages of digitizing voice in a way that people can, use their voices to express themselves, but still get, engage with a computer, if you like, and get a relatively simple problem solved quite quickly without the need to speak to a human. And I think that's a good thing. But I also think that, if I think about the contact center of the future and the way that people reach out, if you think about the experience today, it's not very joined up, and quite often, if I need to speak to somebody in a contact center, I'm still having to find a phone number somewhere. I'm, picking up my phone, not necessarily dialing. Maybe I am dialing, maybe I'm clicking on something on a screen, but it's quite a disjointed experience. And I think, I'm using the old network. I'm, connecting through and maybe using a basic IVR type system to identify my intent. So that whole experience, I think, is quite disjointed. And I think in the future, we'll definitely see human experiences embedded much more deeply within a digital experience of some sort. So what I mean by that is, if I go to a website, instead of me having to find a phone number and dial somebody and then start my journey all over again, I think that journey should be much more seamless, and I should be able to just click on something, start speaking to somebody, sharing content. Again, the human can still be there in the loop. We can still use voice as a way of communicating, but it's augmented by the fact that the customer's online. We can share content more readily. We can share ideas more readily. So for me, that's where it's going to go. I think it's going to be, just a much more seamless experience than it is today. And a bit like before the pandemic, a lot of these technologies actually already exist. But people just aren't using them. Zoom existed before the pandemic, but not many of us really used it in the way that we do now. Now we spend most of our days on it. I think we kind of need to get to that point with this kind of technology and with contact centers being a bit more integrated into the overall customer journey, the overall customer experience. So I think for me, that's where it's going to head. That's the exciting part for me.
I would agree. That was just the word I was going to use then, which was exciting, because if we think about how we interact with technology now, it's seamlessly through Alexa or Siri. It's seamless through Zoom, and we can collaborate with Teams, and we can still be as effective, if not more, than we were when we were doing it face to face. Yet, if I want to make a change to my car insurance, I'm already thinking, right, here we go.
Yeah.
I'm now going to go through a bit of a journey. I'm going to allocate myself some time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to meditate before I start, and and have to go around the houses, jump around. And I don't think I'm explaining anything that people can't resonate with, right? You steel yourself for that interaction, and it feels like a great achievement afterwards when you get something done. And it's at odds with so much of our experience with technology. And I think that we have to be honest with ourselves in our industry and say we need to get, to your point exactly, more seamless in how we let people get what they want to get done, and not feel like it's a mission.
Yeah, agree. And also, by bringing together these different technologies, you are able to leverage what's best out of voice, digital, chat, all these different things that in most cases today, you're either on one or the other, and people call it omni-channel. It's a bit of an industry buzzword really, but the idea that, okay, I can chat to you 1 minute and then I can speak to you on voice, and maybe I can send you an email, and guess what, it all goes into the same pot, and the agent on the other end can see, oh, you sent an email last week. That's not really omni-channel. I think for me, it's about, like I say, I might start my journey on a website and then starts chatting to somebody. They start sharing some content. They might send me an email afterwards with a summary, and you're bringing all those things into the mix at any one time. And I can't remember if we talked about this on the last podcast, but I quite often use this analogy with sort of Alexa, the old style Alexa versus Siri. And you ask it the weather, you ask Alexa the weather, and it takes you about 20-30 seconds to play the weather back to you over voice. So the point being, it's inputting a command with voice is really quick, but getting the information back takes ages. But you do the same for Siri, and you say, "What's the weather?" and it pops up on your screen, and within half a
That's a really
second,
good
you've been
point.
able to know exactly what's going on with the weather. And so issuing commands with voice, asking questions is really quick and easy. It's a quick way for us to express a need, but then to get that information back, often, a picture paints 1,000 words. Having something that conveys information very quickly, we can read much faster than we can listen. And I think those, bringing those things together is a really interesting area for development, I think, for the industry. So, yeah.
Completely agree. Let me just let my dog out. He's making loads of noise. Oh no, he's still okay. The get out of ramp dog.
Yeah.
Here he comes. So with that in mind, in terms of the different ways to use voice, I remember, as well as the kind of you don't need to have voice, or you should really be thinking about not having it at all, because otherwise you'll be left behind. It came around about the same time as people talking about using video more as well.
Yeah.
Do you think that is going to have a place in our the contact center of the future?
So there's two things there. You mentioned. So I think firstly, we've got to start thinking of voice as a digital channel. That's the first thing I think organisations need to do. So instead of trying to kill it, think of it as a digital channel. And what I mean by that is that because of all of the stuff we talked about in the last podcast around the development of AI, the democratization of AI, the fact that it's available now, the fact that natural language processing has become, almost as sophisticated, almost as accurate as us humans listening and speaking. What that means is, we can treat the incoming voice interaction from a customer as a digital channel, first of all, ask them some questions, try and solve their problem quickly, or at the very least capture information to allow us to make a better routing decision, and pass that information over to the person in the contact center, so they're on the front foot. They know why the customer's calling, they're ready to answer the question. So that's one aspect of treating it as a digital channel. The other thing is, there's so much information that is exchanged between customers and agents in call centers. And if you think about, most organizations these days see data as a real differentiator. They want to use data effectively to drive differentiation in their products and services, as a competitive advantage. You will not find more data than you'll find in a contact center. The challenge historically is that data has been unstructured, and we've not been able to really truly tap into it and make use of it. So that's the second aspect, I think, of treating voice like a digital channel, is unlocking the data and the potential within the voice to be able to understand more about the interaction and drive more value from it. So that's one thing. And then you mentioned about video as well. Do I think video has a place in the contact center? Well, we've been doing quite a lot of workshops recently with clients, and it's definitely, there is definitely a place for video, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's in the kind of mass interactions with customers. Where we're seeing quite a lot of video used at the moment is almost replacing some of those interactions that would have taken place in a branch network, in a bank, for example, going through a mortgage application process, or something that is very much a one-to-one complex interaction, like I say, that you probably would have booked an appointment with a manager in a branch or something like that. All of those interactions now have gone digital, but they are over Zoom or similar kinds of technology. So those types of interactions, pre-booked, one-on-one, consultative type interactions, I think that lends itself very well to video. Do I think that when I call my insurance company to renew my insurance, do I need to see the person at the other end? Probably not. I might feel a bit strange about letting a stranger into my house and seeing what's going on behind me. Not that they can see much in my white box of an office. Do I want to see them? I don't need to see them. But I think, like I said earlier, but for that agent to be able to share something with me, to present information to me, a document, to give me, here's a visual representation of the different insurance options that you have, and here's the price associated with them. And just have a quick read through those and make sure you figure out the right one, and then you can select it, as opposed to saying, could you just repeat what option number 1 was and how does that compare to option number 2? That's hard to do over voice. So I think that's where I see video or content sharing having its place in the kind of mass market contact center of the future, if that makes sense.
Yeah, this is why you're the hat trick hero of the podcast, because there's so many good points made there, Stuart. Yeah. And just touch on the first one, totally agree that if you just in our minds think about voice as a digital channel, already we've elevated it slightly to probably where it needs to be. The other one being around just the data inherent in voice interactions. You only need to look at well, for example, the transcript that's going to come out of us talking now is going to be so rich. There'll be so much of it. You think about speech analytics and what's possible there, and really understanding how to improve individuals, how to improve the customer experience. You're dead right. That kind of the source of data that you get from voice, often the people speaking can't remember what they've said or how they phrased something in a certain way. And this is a way of getting it and doing something meaningful with it. And then really good point around just, I guess what you're saying then is it's combining how we use our brains visually as well to be able to understand some complex things that maybe voice alone might not do, or again, it's all got to be for the betterment of the customer. But it does make me think there needs to be more done to upskill and to provide our frontline team members with all the tools needed to do that. But it should be fun for them to do.
I think so. And just building on your point there around speech analytics, again, it's a similar thing. The technology has been around for many years, really. But because of recent advancements, there's a couple of things that are really important there that have made it, I think, have elevated its position. One is the accuracy alone. Because of the advancement of speech recognition, the levels of accuracy that we can get now are an order of magnitude over what we could get, a few years ago. So we've got more accurate information in that transcript of the conversation. The second thing, and this is where it probably maybe gets a little bit technical, but the application of machine learning to that interaction is enabling us to take what is a vast amount of data and extract meaning from it in a much more straightforward way. So really, at its heart, machine learning is about one key aspect of it is about the ability to spot patterns within very complex data sets and start identifying regularities in those patterns and then draw out meaning from them. So whereas previously, you might get an interaction and a human would have to hunt through that data looking for insights and information to try and find patterns of behaviors, whereas with the application of machine learning technology, it can surface those insights. So it takes another step out of the process, if you like, to try and draw meaning from that information. And then if you then take that to the next level and how, we've talked a lot about how the technology can be used to engage with customers and help them solve problems themselves. But it can also be used, to listen into conversations with agents and customers and start surfacing irrelevant information like knowledge articles and bits of insight, or even summarizing the call so that I don't have to spend 20 minutes in wrap summing up my notes. The technology's done it for me. It's given me a summary of the conversation, picked out the key points, put it in the wrap, in my notes, and then I'm on to speak to the customer for the next one. So it's taken that overhead away from the agent to be able to just focus on the customer, and that's what they should be focusing on.
Completely agree. And it's kind of seems like a little bit of a very topical thing about it's making the most of your interactions so that you're not having to rework after it or before it, whatever, that you're just making the most, and the technology's there to do that now. It sounds great, and you guys are kind of well into doing that and at the forefront of that, right?
Yeah, we're doing some really cool stuff at the moment. You know, particularly in that latter part, I'd still say it was in its early days, and we're still exploring where the real value sits for that technology. Right now, some of the best use cases that I've seen are when you've got a messaging exchange between the customer and the advisor, and surfacing, you know, suggested responses, and you know, so the less keys the agent has to press on their keypad, and the more they can just, yeah, that's a good answer, click on it, you know, the more throughput we're giving them, the more they can focus on the customer, the less on bashing away on their keyboards. And chat's an obvious application for that. You know, voice, I mean, imagine we're having a conversation now, and every time, you know, you or I say something, a really interesting tidbit of information pops up on the screen, and we can like bring that into the conversation. That's there. These are some of the areas that are emerging now around how we can use that real time for voice, which I'm really excited about. I think that's a, you know, speaking on behalf of the contact center industry, and the agents out there, I think this is something that's going to really help them to, you know, to do their jobs more effectively, to feel more confident when a customer asks them a complex question, knowing that, you know, the technologies they're backing them up, and offering them off, you know, suggestions to help them appear, you know, and that they're able to answer any question the customer throws at them. So yeah, it's an interesting space right now.
It really is. And to be honest, it's you only need to look at the popularity and the proliferation of things like Clubhouse, Wisdom. I can't remember the name of the one that Twitter's own version of Clubhouse, but this is all, it's just pure audio based, right? It's all
Yeah,
just,
Discord, that's another one.
yeah, Discord, and that whole kind of means by which people are comfortable interacting, often with strangers. You know, you want to learn something, you go on Clubhouse or Wisdom or whatever, and you
Yeah,
scroll through, have a look, see what you can find, and it's really really popular, and it's all voice based.
it's funny. Because I know you both got kids, and you sort of, I think any parent out there worries about how much screen time their kids are having and how social media is impacting them and so on. But then you know, I've got two boys. One's 18, one's 15, and you can hear them in their rooms talking to their mates,
Yeah,
either playing games, or in my older son's case, debating stuff. Like you say, he's using
yeah,
Discord. They're dropped into rooms. They're laughing. They're, you know,
yeah,
they're absolutely in fits. They're like, you know, storming around debating these different things, or they're in a battle or whatever.
yeah.
And you know, I kind of gone recently from thinking, worrying about how much time they're spending doing this, thinking, hang on a second, they are socializing way more than I ever did at that age, because they're just chatting to each other all the time. You know, I remember when I
Yeah,
was younger, you know, we had one phone in the house, and, you know,
yeah.
I'd be on the phone chatting to one of my mates, and my mum would pick up the phone at the other side and say, right, you've been on for 10 minutes now, come on, off you get. So, you know, they are communicating a lot more using voice alongside digital channels, way more than we ever did at that age. So that's quite encouraging to me. I think it's a
Yeah.
good.
And it's also kind of, you think about all the streaming services, and often that kind of, you think about using different channels at once, right? So video, voice, and chat, people chatting on streams,
Mm,
and just, you know, again, everyone being very comfortable with that. And I
yeah,
think that is, you're kind of looking at the future right there in terms of how we're going to deal with our customers, because our customers are going to demand that, because our
yeah,
customers right now, like you say, are the customers of the future are your sons,
yeah.
and that's how they're comfortable, and that's how we've got to be kind of prepared to service their needs, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, and again, this is without laboring too much on the pandemic, you know, that's been a real driver for a lot of this stuff. It's, in many ways, it's shrunk the world. And, you know, even, you know, I was looking at Apple have come out with this new thing recently where again, you can sit down with a bunch of people all over the world, doesn't really matter where, synchronize watching a video together, or listening to a podcast or a radio show, or some music together. So it's breaking down distance, but still having a shared experience, you know, with somebody else, even though they could be anywhere in the world. And it's the same with all of these, you know, voice-based social media channels, and you know, the games that people play. It's allowing you to communicate, but with a shared goal, a shared purpose, which in many cases happens to be a digitally driven, experience. So yeah, it's an exciting time, I think.
Maybe it definitely is, and maybe it's kind of voice enhanced. It's that's what it is. It's not in isolation that voice will stand the test of time. It's voice complemented by the other channels. It's done that way.
Mm,
Because the possibilities are horrendous, and also you'd think it would have a real positive benefit on employee engagement as well. I think
mm.
just about being the way you envisaged talking to someone and having helpful things set up or summaries of the call, it just reduces that mental load on people, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you're going back to one of your points earlier on. Language, how language came about. Language, as far as we can tell, I think was developed or evolved about 25,000 years ago. But for almost the entirety of that period, up until about 100-ish years ago, it was constrained by as far as you could shout. It was literally, you had to be within,
Yeah.
a 10-15 meter radius to somebody to use voice as a way of communicating. And then along came the telephone, and it gradually grew in popularity. But that's really what led to this explosion in contact centers back in the 80s. That's how that came about. And if you look at the data, I've been looking into this quite a lot recently, how the UK has, and I think, again, I think we talked about this in the last podcast, but the UK has one of probably the second largest market in the world for contact centers. It's one of the most sophisticated markets in the world. It's a huge employer within the UK, maybe 1 million or so people employed within the sector. It's becoming more and more and more professional. We're right, this country's at the forefront of development of the contact center sector globally. But what we've just figured out now, I think, over the last few years, and what's been driven by the pandemic, is exactly your point. It's voice plus another channel. It's, all that time voice has been very serial in the way we communicate. It's been via the phone. We've had nothing else to share. Now we figured out how to layer other channels alongside voice in real time. And you're right, it just makes voice even more powerful. It makes human contact even more powerful, because we're no longer constrained just to not seeing someone at the other end of the phone, and having to use quite a serial way of communicating as the way that we talk to each other. So yeah, it's all good.
It is, and it's funny, isn't it? Because you think about it, I'm going to show my age here as well, but I can remember getting my first mobile phone, and your text was limited to kind of a tiny little,
140 characters, yeah.
yeah, a tiny little space. And
Yeah,
now I've taken to, I think I left you one the other day. I tend to leave a voice note, because
yeah,
if I'm walking the dog or whatever, I don't want to type, and I feel like I can express myself better
yeah,
through my voice. So hold down the microphone, leave that voice note, and then often get replies back the same way. And it's
yeah,
funny how it's kind of evolved.
yeah. It is. My daughter does that all the time. She's always just leaving voice messages, and partly because it's that laziness of just, I can't bother to type. I just want to leave a voice message. But like you say, you can express yourself so much more clearly. You can, and it's more personal, and it's just
Mm.
so much more, depth to it, I think, than just sending a message to somebody. So
And I don't get called out by the grammar police
yeah,
for voice messages. No
yeah,
one's going to worry about where I'm putting an apostrophe then.
no, exactly, or spell check, or completely change
Yeah.
the meaning of the sentence that you were trying to write. Yeah.
But Stu, it's been another fascinating dip into your mind and your world, and I know we're going to be talking about some more of this stuff later on. What would you say to people listening around who might, be thinking about where voice sits in their contact center as a final kind of thing for them to be thinking about?
Well, I just think you've got to realize the importance of human communication in the way that we engage with customers, but try not to think of voice as just something that is the catch-all of of when something goes wrong. the customer has to find the phone number. They've got to find their way through to speak to somebody. They're having to put effort in to get to the point where they just want to get their problem solved and speak to, one of the representatives of your organization that's probably going to deliver the most value and create the most meaning for that customer than anything that can be done on a website. So, just try and think about making that journey more joined up. Think about what happens before the customer picks up the phone. What are they doing, and what's leading them to pick the phone up? And can you reach out to them through the web, through whatever it is, to make sure that that when they do decide to speak to somebody, that journey for them is as seamless as possible. And quite often what that means is that the contact center has to work a bit closer with the people that are designing those upstream experiences, to be able to join the dots and connect it all together. And think about that customer journey, what the route they're going on. Are they going to Google first? Are they going to the web first? Do they have a mobile app? Because there's a whole lot of stuff that happens, like I say, before the customer gets to the point where they start dialing that number. And I think that's where, you've got to link voice into that broader experience.
Yeah, it's insightful as ever. Thanks so much for coming on, and look forward to you coming back on again.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Yeah, you too. Thanks, Stu. Thanks, mate.